Prof. Shepherd thought that he had to have this lowered down. Oh my gosh, I feel like a midget today. Thanks very much, Melissa, for organizing, gathering all of us here together, such an important topic, and for inviting me to participate. I'm sorry that I haven't been here for the rest of the days, and tomorrow I'm leaving already, but hopefully there will be some collaboration and, future papers, co-authoringship that will derive from this conference. I'm looking forward to that as well. It is a privilege to address you today as we gather to explore the role of humour in the context of social justice. We are living in an era marked by heightened awareness of social inequalities and injustices. Movements advocating for racial equality, gender rights, and LGBTQ rights have gained momentum, prompting scholars and leaders alike to pay increased attention to the power dynamics that shape societies. The rise of social media has also transformed how humour is disseminated and received, allowing for the rapid sharing of jokes and memes that can either promote solidarity and cooperation, but at the same time also perpetuate stereotypes and distrust. This shift necessitates critical examination of the content we consume and share, as well as its potential impact. Scholars from diverse backgrounds come together to discuss interdisciplinary collaboration. By integrating insights from different fields, understanding of humour's role in shaping societal norms. Now, some of the challenges we face regarding humour are no doubt a result of there being a variety of ways to understand humour, the ways in which context shapes its creation, and also the various ways in which it is interpreted, either by intended or unintended audiences. So today I would like to introduce you to a new theory that can help clear away much of this confusion. The mutual vulnerability theory of laughter was first described by American biologist John Charles Simon in 2008. Now, my journey recently intersected with Simon's through various academic conferences and collaborations. And so this year, we combined his expertise in evolutionary biology with my scholarship in humour studies to produce a book that will be published next year. So we're very excited about that. In this presentation, there's John, for those of you who are not familiar with his work, or the mutual vulnerability theory of laughter. In this presentation, I will explore the theory's foundational premise, its implications for understanding the dynamics of humour, and then also how distinguishing between laughing with and laughing at is influenced by motivations and underlying social hierarchies. By examining such interactions, we will better understand how humour may be used to promote social justice through a sense of shared vulnerabilities, and to help suppress inequality using both affable and antagonistic ridicule. With these conceptual tools, scholars like ourselves will be better able to understand how humour may be justifiably employed to promote social justice and counter systemic inequality, but also how it can sometimes be misused in an effort to cultivate distrust, hatred, and unfortunately, even times violence. So the mutual vulnerability theory, from here on, I'm just saying MVT, it's much shorter, posits that laughter is an innate, non-verbal form of communication. It explains it as best thinking of our laughter or your laughter as a vocal affirmation of mutual vulnerability, which effectively reminds all of us that we have inherent limitations and shortcomings. There's three main concepts to the MBT, all interrelated, that account for why we laugh and allow us to gain invaluable insight into the role of humour in shaping social interactions. And these are vulnerability, status, and motivation. So the concept of vulnerability can best be thought of as physical traits or behaviors that inhibit us from achieving our goals. And I'm not sure why that happened. There we go. Physical traits, ideas, or behaviors that could hinder our ability to achieve our goals. Now, we have different degrees of vulnerability. Some vulnerabilities that we recognize as common or typical lead us to think of them as normal, mundane, or insignificant. I think it's my paper that's moving this. Apologies. However, when they are highlighted, exaggerated, or emphasized in some way, either through word or action, we perceive them as falling within a vast, highly subjective, ever-shifting middle ground between normalcy on one hand and deficiency on the other hand, the latter rendering reaching one's goal highly unlikely or impossible. As an example, we are all susceptible to being hungry. So when a friend comes to you or a colleague comes to you and says, oh, I'm absolutely famished, I haven't eaten all day, and it's lunchtime, we find this amusing. However, if the same colleague conveys the same message after not having eaten for 2 weeks, we would consider this a deficiency and something very serious, and therefore laughter or joking about it would be unthinkable. So our notions of normalcy, vulnerability, and deficiency are influenced by a number of factors, not all of them listed here today, but the main ones are age, sex, mood, social context, relationships, personal history, cultural background, and experience. Just to consider a few of them, age, for example. I'm sure many of you are familiar with many studies that show children are much more prone to laughter than adults. This is obviously because they have more playtime. When you're adults in the workplace and you have to work, there's very limited time for play and thus limited time for laughter. Unless you're humour scholars and study this for a living, then we're the exception to the rule. Then mood. If we just think about if someone's passed away, or I'm very sad, or I'm very angry, or I'm very fearful, I'm much less likely to laugh at something funny or something humorous than if I was relaxed, comfortable, sitting on my couch, watching a stand-up comedy or watching a rom-com. So all of these factors are very important in influencing how we perceive and consume humor. Okay, now there's different types of vulnerability. For convenience, these can be thought of as physical, emotional, cognitive, and social in nature. So if we think of physical vulnerabilities, we might be inclined to think of poor strength. That's definitely me, person on the left-hand side trying to lift a barbell. We might think of blushing when you're embarrassed, falling downstairs, tripping, which happens far too often, even to youngsters, reasonably youngsters like myself, and then also limitations in mobility. If we think of emotional vulnerability, we might think of examples like vanity, anger, fear. Cognitive vulnerability, problem-solve failure, struggling to solve a puzzle, forgetfulness, and then also confusion. Social vulnerability, poor manners, someone chewing with their mouth open, food hanging out, urinating against a wall, or even deception in the workplace can be thought of as a social vulnerability. Now, although our perceptions of vulnerability differ from individual to individual and from culture to culture, there are many broadly shared or at least widely recognized conceptions of what might constitute a vulnerability. And oftentimes, we may recognize multiple vulnerabilities being highlighted within a single event. And I must apologize for my tongue twisting. The night before I arrived here, I actually was scheduled for root canal, and I said, no, I have to be at this conference. And so they pulled my tooth and my tongue keeps going there. So yeah, it's very annoying. That's a physical vulnerability and a social vulnerability now, because it's diminishing my social standing in front of everyone. At the same time, emotional vulnerability, because I'm slightly embarrassed about my inability for enunciation and pronunciation at the same time. So as I was saying, we can often recognize multiple vulnerabilities within a single event. For example, we have a gentleman falling downstairs there. So his lack of coordination can be thought of as a physical vulnerability. Likely embarrassed about falling, especially if it's in front of people, that can be considered an emotional vulnerability. Diminished social standing, we can think of this as a social vulnerability, especially, for example, if he's on a date. Both might lessen his chances of being a selected life partner. Now, the second concept crucial to MVT is status, which essentially is a measure of your vulnerability. We can think of status as a hierarchical position within a social context, and these can be influenced from various factors such as wealth, education, power, social skills, or even competence. Now, with vulnerability, whether physical, emotional, cognitive, or social, few and or minor vulnerabilities means we have a higher status. And conversely, individuals with many and or substantial vulnerabilities are likely to have a lower status. Now, the third concept of MVT is motivation, and motivation is heavily influenced by emotional states. So, for example, the desire to laugh is essentially an emotion. We must remember this. And emotions are like the paint on an artist's palette. They can be blended together as when we are both wary of something and drawn to it at the same time. But they can also be layered on top of one another. For example, a child's desire to draw attention with a screen may be superimposed upon an existing mix of excitement and joy at being gifted a new puppy, or frustration and confusion at not being able to solve a puzzle, or upon anger and fear by being approached by a stranger. Similarly, a feeling of amusement, the emotion that, when significantly and sufficiently intense enough, motivates us to laugh, can be layered upon 4 other emotional states. Laughter can serve to lift others, lift ourselves, lower others, or lower ourselves. So laughter can, in the first case, laughter can arise from sympathy and understanding for someone else's failings. It is an expression of support to lift them after this loss of status, what is often referred to as laughing with others. And within this theory, we call this lifting laughter. When our own vulnerabilities are brought to attention, either by ourselves or others, it can be advantageous for us to remind others of our collectively shared shortcomings in a way that says, don't think less of me, you've done this too. We will express what might be thought of as self-lifting laughter in order to elevate our status and diffuse our embarrassment. When we laugh at someone else's misfortunes, particularly at those perceived as arrogant, our laughter serves to lower their status and might be thought of as laughing at them. This lowering laughter can be layered on top of feelings of mild disapproval or dissatisfaction, and in more extreme cases, even feelings of hatred or loathing, especially if the person being laughed at has achieved their status unethically or undeservedly. And when we overstate our own status, we can express humility with self-lowering laughter to attribute it to good fortune or undeserved praise. In each case, the message is exactly the same, and the goal is to increase cooperation by supporting reliable collaborators, reining in apologetic defectors, and expelling incorrigible individuals that threaten group cohesion and success. Now, in order to test this theory, or at least apply this theory, I want us to analyze a few video clips. And I'm going to hope that you're going to participate with me when I do that I can garner some questions from you guys and some answers. So let's start here.
I was wondering what the craziest audition stories you guys have had.
I've had someone stop me and say, you know this is a comedy, right? That was a kick in the nuts.
I auditioned for a Starburst commercial. This was, I want to say, Wednesday. This was like in 2004, and I walk in and they go, so it's on the beach, so if you don't mind taking your shirt off, and I went, I'm gonna go. And
oh my gosh, I think Haydar laughs more than anyone else. Okay, in this clip, both comedians utilize self-deprecatory humor through anecdotes that reveal their career missteps. Haydar recounts not being funny enough to participate in the comedy industry, and John Mulhaney jokes about still needing to go on auditions for commercials despite being a well-known star. In each case, the comedian's vulnerabilities are highlighted. So let's first think of status as a level field, as a balanced field. And now I want to ask you, what vulnerabilities do you think were highlighted? You can start with Haydar or Mulhaney. Anyone? Yes, go ahead.
I think with Haydar is the fact that he thought, in essence, he might not be as good as he thought he was at his job. And then with Mulhaney, he's not as sexy or conventionally attractive as the producers or whoever casting director might want him to be.
Correct for all. You want?
Yeah, a fear of not being funny enough.
Absolutely.
And also being in front of the camera. All right, but being in front of a camera is nerve-wracking.
Absolutely. So how we can differentiate them or put that into categories is with Haydar, emotional vulnerability, insecurity about his comedic talent, like you said, social vulnerability also, his uncertainty about his place in the entertainment industry. And if we go to Mulhaney, physical vulnerability, like you said, lack of masculine physique, or what we consider to be a sexy masculine physique, and emotional vulnerability, fear about removing his shirt. He would rather opt out of an audition than take his shirt off. Okay. So when these comedians' vulnerabilities are heightened, what happens? Their status decreases. When their status decreases, we require laughter to lift their status up to parity, to the original position, to where their status began. The laughter by the audience and both Haydar does this job, and we call this an example of lifting laughter. Now, the audience and Haydar weren't the only ones laughing. Mulhaney and Haydar were laughing at themselves. So when Haydar and Mulhaney laugh at their own shortcomings, their social status is temporarily diminished, and their own laughter by Haydar and Mulhaney themselves signifies a desire to lift themselves up to their original status. This is self-lifting laughter and helps the laughers to alleviate feelings of embarrassment and present themselves as more resilient and approachable. So now let's delve into an illustrative example of how laughter can diminish someone's social standing.
Know the thing that Joe Biden has been cognitively sound for years. I mean, only a perfectly sane man in peak physical and mental condition would recount a story like this.
And Corn Pop was a bad dude. and he ran a bunch of bad boys. And I did, and back in those days, to show how things have changed, one of the things you had to use, if you used pomade in your hair, you had to wear a bathing cap. In those days, you used to remember the straight razor, you'd bang them on the curb, get them rusty, put them in a rain barrel, get them rusty. I got hairy legs that turn, blonde in the sun. And the kids used to come up and reach in the pool and rub my leg down so it was straight, and then watch the hair come back up again. They'd look at it. So I learned about roaches. I learned about kids jumping on my lap. And I've loved kids jumping on my lap.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Yes, no man has ever been better equipped to lead the United States, and indeed all of the free world, than the current Commander-in-Chief. We're in good hands, folks.
Okay, so in this video clip with US President Biden, we witness a series of verbal gaffes, misstatements, and moments of confusion that reveal his cognitive vulnerabilities. I don't think I have to ask anyone here what vulnerabilities are highlighted. I think those are pretty evident. So these lapses not only raise questions about his leadership capabilities, but also contribute to a broader perception of instability within his administration, which also highlights a significant social vulnerability. And there we go. The laughter, so now we know his status is diminished. The laughter from the news announcer in response to Biden's errors underscores these vulnerabilities, casting doubt on his ability to effectively lead the nation. This laughter serves to lower his status in the eyes of the audience. Furthermore, the act of laughing can elevate the status of those who engage in it. In this case, the news announcer and her viewers, creating a temporary power dynamic. In this context, the laugher may feel a sense of superiority over the target of their laughter, reinforcing their own social position while simultaneously undermining that of the individual being laughed at. News announcer's laughter brings down Biden's status. Bearing in mind, Biden will already be at a higher status than any of us here because he is the US president. And this would be an example of lowering laughter. Now, in this video clip, we see beautiful Hollywood actress Priyanka Chopra.
Usually challenge each other to something, either. Which is such a disastrous idea on your end. I don't know why you challenge me for things. I'm a natural born winner.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Okay. So in this video clip, we observe a nuanced interplay of status dynamics between her and the host, Jimmy Fallon. Initially, Chopra exaggerates her own status, playfully positioning herself as a figure of significant cognitive abilities in comparison to her host, Jimmy Fallon. She then skillfully lowers her status to convey humility and approachability. By doing so, she signals that she is not genuinely arrogant, countering any potential negative perceptions that might arise from her initial self-elevation. This shift in demeanor fosters a connection with both the host and the audience, as it reflects a level of self-awareness and relatability that many find appealing. Now, analyzing how laughter is perceived can often be nuanced and more complex. While previous clips have made it relatively easy to identify the type of laughter being employed, there are instances where the intentions behind the laughter can be ambiguous. In these situations, we must carefully consider the context to understand whether the laughter is sympathetic or mean-spirited. So let's turn our attention to this video.
This Fashion Week over in Paris. The latest fashions are on the runway for next spring. But there was a problem out there today. One of the British designers' shows had the difficulty. A model fell down twice. That's her going down once. The young woman wearing that pink skirt and the orange platform shoes never quite recovered after that. There she goes again. That had to hurt. That was uncool. That's embarrassing. This is at least the second time.
Well, you all are just really tickled by that, aren't you? You try walking in those shoes.
Hey, first of all, baby, I got enough meat on me that it's all right. George. I'm sorry. Come on, girl. We want to apologize. Hold on. You want me to read more? You're a dog. Oh, he lives to do that to me.
Okay, so this clip features a model on a runway, an environment that is usually associated with grace and poise. However, in this instant, she experiences not one, but two falls. These mishaps bring attention to her lack of coordination, which showcases her physical vulnerability. Additionally, her inability to perform her task, to gracefully strut across the catwalk, indicates a social vulnerability as it undermines her professionalism in front of an audience. Of course, she's also likely embarrassed about her situation, which signifies an emotional vulnerability, as she navigates the potential judgment and scrutiny from both onlookers and viewers. Now, when we think about the type of laughter being expressed here, when she falls, the commentator's initial laughter seems to stem from sympathy, as they likely resonate with the experience of facing awkward moments in front of the camera, which they themselves no doubt are used to as well. In this instance, their laughter functions as a means of support, intending to uplift her rather than ridicule her. However, as the clip unfolds, especially following multiple replays of the incident, the tone of the laughter appears to become more mean-spirited and critical, or at the very least insensitive, characterized by an underlying mockery. Furthermore, this is what I found especially interesting, is the differing reactions of the male and female commentators. So the male commentators display hearty, dismissive laughter that leans towards ridicule, while the female commentator refrains from laughing entirely. This contrast highlights how humor can reflect societal conditioning and the differing expectations around emotional expression based on gender. Now so I've answered all the questions. How nice of me. So nice of me, hey. Okay. So what we can deduce from this talk is that the key to effective humor, or humor in good taste, humor that fosters inclusivity and collectivity, lies in its balance. And what I mean by balance is that the vulnerabilities of the humorist must be balanced with the vulnerabilities of the target. In other words, you can think of it as leveling the playing field. This balance is essential across various social dimensions, including status levels, racial identities, sexual orientations, genders, ages, professions, and sectors of society. Conversely, some forms of humor are justifiably considered out of bounds as they reinforce stereotypes and social hierarchies. So humor that disproportionately targets a specific group or focuses entirely on their weaknesses, especially when it highlights immutable traits such as race, ethnicity, sexuality, or disability, can be particularly harmful. This is especially true when there are clear underlying motivations for dehumanization, such as ethnic cleansing, deportation, displacement, loss of employment, withholding care or resources, injury, or even death. Furthermore, such humor can effectively stifle debate by defaming those with opposing viewpoints. For example, if a comedian consistently makes jokes at the expense of a marginalized group without acknowledging their own vulnerabilities or those of other groups, it risks perpetuating division rather than fostering connection. Then there is the vast middle ground where mild, justified humorous reprimands will draw needed attention to incompetence. This type of humor not only highlights shortcomings, but also serves as a pathway for reintegrating individuals into an open and diverse society. By promoting accountability in a light-hearted manner, such humor encourages positive change for the benefit of all. In conclusion, understanding laughter's message and the many contexts in which laughter is expressed is critical in determining both its intent and its ramifications. In social justice movements, activists must navigate the complexities of vulnerability and power dynamics, acknowledging how humor can both uplift and undermine. And now the MVT provides a nuanced conceptual framework for understanding the humor being used within the marketplace of ideas, where various narratives are constructed and contested. By recognizing the shared vulnerabilities that underpin human experiences, individuals can cultivate laughter that not only fosters solidarity, but also actively promotes social equity, countering the ways in which humor can perpetuate long-standing injustices. The delicate interplay between laughing with and laughing at, as well as lifting and lowering laughter, highlights the importance of comprehension when assessing the broader context, intent, and interpersonal dynamics that shape humor's role in social discourse. When activists and allies focus on laughter that arises from mutual recognition of vulnerabilities, they create an environment of empathy and shared humanity. This form of laughter becomes a tool for bridging divides, reinforcing alliances, and creating inclusive spaces where diverse voices are celebrated. However, the potential for humor to inflict harm or to maintain existing power structures remains a critical concern. As we engage in discussions about social justice, we must remain vigilant about the context in which laughter occurs. It requires a conscious effort to differentiate between lifting laughter, which seeks to elevate and support, and lowering laughter, which may marginalize and ridicule. The responsibility lies within each of us to provoke thoughtful reflection on how our laughter contributes to the narratives we build and the justices we seek. In this way, humor can be a powerful ally in the pursuit of social change. It can provoke dialogue, encouraging critical reflection, and mobilize communities around shared goals. As such, the insight gained from the mutual vulnerability theory can equip activists with the understanding needed to wield humor conscientiously. By embracing humor as an essential part of social justice, we pave the way for a collective journey toward equity, compassion, and a more just society where laughter enriches rather than excludes and uplifts rather than undermines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doc, for that keynote. I would like to take questions, comments, any engagements. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I will take those 4 and then hand over to you, Doc, for responses. Then we'll do another round.
Thank you very much for this incredibly clear and well-structured presentation. And I think just because of the clarity, a part of my subversive being kind of tries to gauge, or rather detect the murky grounds, those which cannot be put into that theory. And I think a part of it is probably the question around the staging, the artifice that this humor becomes present. And this, again, is for me also a system at work, which which amplifies, which allows certain things to happen, and has in itself an artifice and an own performativity. Yeah? And in this, I do think that the systems within which we are, like in the sense of Foucault, also totally interwoven, that actually the humor is probably also something which will never be reined in. And my curiosity, thanks to your presentation, is where are those murky grounds, which are not yet dealt with? And yeah, so you're very inspiring me. And maybe you also know that in any presentation, you have to leave out a certain amount of things.
Absolutely. Unfortunately, yes. Otherwise, we'd be here all night. It's far harder to shorten a presentation.
Sorry, Doc, can we just take the floor and then you respond at
Okay,
once?
but you're going to have to help me remember everything because my cognitive vulnerability.
All right.
I'm going to forget.
So let's do it how you want it then. We'll
Okay.
do one and the response.
Okay, I'll try and be short and sweet. There is murky waters, especially with a theory like this that is relatively new. There aren't many papers on it. There hasn't been much analysis. And I think that's what's always necessary to decipher murky waters. The only way to get through those gray areas is different perspectives and different analyses, which we haven't seen with this theory yet. So I'm hopelessly not answering your question, except to say that it's something we need to attend to, and hopefully more and more scholars will write about it so that we will be able to we see where the missing pieces are, see where there's perhaps theoretical underpinnings that need to be brought to the fore. Is that a sufficient answer for you? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennalee. For the record, your dental and oral vulnerabilities are not palpable at all.
I feel they were because my tongue kept slipping right here, and I'm trying not to smile. Even when I was watching the videos, I was trying not to smile because I've got a huge gap here that needs to, a fake tooth needs to go in there tomorrow. But thanks very much.
No.
Thanks for your patience.
So I've got a question. Could we draw a distinction between subjective and objective vulnerability? If we go back to the Biden clip,
yes,
the panel person, the TV person, I think her name was Rita, she strikes me as objectively vulnerable. Her news network could fire her if she crosses the boundary into something that isn't detailed. The Bidens could sue her. The Democratic Party could be on her case. So we could argue she is objectively vulnerable, but not subjectively.
We could argue that. In my perspective, I see, I never thought about it to be, I never in my mind had a separation between the two. For me, it was always subjective because it is all about interpretation, but I completely see your point. And she is indeed vulnerable. And if we had to classify as what vulnerability that is, it would definitely be a social vulnerability because, like you say, the backlash that she might encounter, because she was quite verbal, and even her non-verbal actions towards Biden, she was quite over the top. She definitely was not reserved in any capacity. So yes, I would agree with you that is. No, not at all. Which you would expect a news announcer to be objective and be professional. So she, yes, I suppose so. Don't make me laugh, Chris. I'm trying not to smile. Thanks very much for that question.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for this. This has been very, very thought-provoking. Again, I'd like to come back to the very, very strongly gendered responses here with the model falling on the runway. I was just wondering if we could go a little bit more intersectional in this, because I mean, gender tends to be looked at as a single issue sort of thing, and I'm not quite sure what racial group or ethnic group the model was from.
I didn't quite see that, yeah. But I was thinking about several different kinds of vulnerabilities. I mean, the kinds of, in similar fashion to what Karen said, the kinds of professional vulnerabilities that she's been now probably going to have to experience repercussions for falling twice on the runway. Yes. What are the chances of her being hireable again, for example? However, what is interesting here for me is also to sort of turn the tables in and try and observe what the news anchors were doing, because they were basically exposing themselves as well in forms of social vulnerability, which I would rather be ungenerous to say there's a distinct lack of social intelligence in the way things were handled there. I mean, laughing the first time, whether or not that was uplift that was intended, I'm not sure. But the very fact to laugh at somebody who's down is already something that bears some scrutiny, especially since they bear the privilege of the gaze.
Yes.
And that young woman has just been objectified. I mean, we can talk about the fashion industry and how the female body is being objectified here, but the fact that she's doing work and she's been caught in a rather unfavorable and vulnerable position while working. Right, so there are several different types of vulnerabilities that intersect here, where we see power being sort of tossed back and forth, where I see the model not having any form of agency or power in this sense, because she's the object of the gaze.
Absolutely.
Right, and the types of solidarity declared by the women anchor person, yeah, that's an interesting sort of social intelligence that I'd like to also bring in to play here. I was struck by how you said in your concluding statements that activists should be able to wield humor judiciously with a more conscious engagement with this particular theory, and I agree. Can I just ask about your opinions on how academics would benefit from considering this particular theory as operationalized in academic discussion cultures and so on and so forth, especially what kinds of knowledge are valued, what kinds of knowledge are not valued, who produces these knowledges? How would this also, in your view, function in the work of artists, for example? So these are a couple of things that sort of occurred to me. I'm asking specifically about the academic sort of context as well. I did mention a few sort of interesting vulnerabilities that I sort of addressed in my own presentation, and I was just basically thinking about what Prof. Mpofu talked about earlier. There was a colleague who basically decided that his work was not the way to do proper research work. So several things sort of started resonating with me while you were speaking. Please, if you could speak to the one or the other. Thank you.
Okay. Well, there's many there. Thank you. I will choose one. First, let me very quickly, because I think this is our last question, so I can give you a little bit more time.
There's one more left.
One more. Okay. Okay. I was going to go to the gender route, but let's go the academic route. I think this theory is very practical for academics because it serves as a basis for communication and interpersonal relationships, not just laughter, but humor is part of our lives, everyday lives. And this theory offers us a way to harness it for good and also to conscientiously interpret when there is perhaps mean-spirited communication or negativity that comes from it. So it gives us the opportunity to, how do I say this? To speak to power dynamics that aren't necessarily just based in humor, but everyday power dynamics in personal relationships, even interpersonal relationships. So I think it could be very valuable in academia as a communication class, number one. Unfortunately, in South Africa, not to my knowledge, we don't have courses dedicated specifically to humor, which is an absolute shame because humor intersects with so many different fields and disciplines, especially within the humanities and the social sciences and the arts. Like you mentioned a lot about intersectionality, and humor does that. And it is very interdisciplinary. So I don't know if I'm answering your question sufficiently, but I do feel that it would be of such benefit in fields of communication, in fields of psychology, in understanding people's motivations for laughter, the emotional responses to laughter, even in biology, because the approach is from evolutionary biology. So I think it would be fantastic, especially if this theory could be analyzed both quantitatively and qualitatively. I think it would make a very big difference in academia. Is that sufficient? We can during tea. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Nothing's ever conclusive, is it? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Donian. I don't think your presentation could have been improved with an extra tooth. It was wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Two questions. One, in your studies, what is the physiological consequence or impact of humor on our body? First question. Second, how would you discuss the different types of humor of a Trevor Noah and a Ricky Gervais?
In terms of this theory, or just?
However you wish to make a comparison.
Okay, let me start with Trevor Noah because he is my favorite stand-up comedian of all time. And I had the privilege of meeting him last year, which was incredible. Such a suave guy. So cute too, cute on the eyes. Trevor Noah, I would say, is more observational. And I would say that his humor is directed more at lifting others. His laughter is sympathetic and empathetic. Any culture he targets, let me say, he also always makes a fool of himself. He never just targets someone else. He will always point out, always using self-deprecatory humor. Not always, let me not say always, but often uses self-deprecatory humor. So I feel when it comes to his comedy, there is a balance between the humorist and the target. So I would consider his humor lifting. I don't see it as mean-spirited or vengeful or harmful or negative in any way. Whereas Ricky Gervais, I would say more of the opposite. I would say that his humor targets other people more. So it's more laughing at, whereas Trevor Noah is more laughing with his audience. I feel Ricky Gervais is laughing at them. So there is within this theoretical framework, it's more lowering laughter. And as I mentioned, lowering laughter can range from like just mild disapproval and ribbing and laughing at someone's expense to rather severe, where it can inflict harm and reinforce stereotypes. And I don't think Ricky Gervais' humor is to that extent, but I would definitely classify it as lowering humor. And now your first question, I've already forgotten. Okay. So the physiological benefits of humor, I would say definitely laughter is to relieve stress, pent up nervous energy. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with a practice called laughter yoga. Are any of you familiar with laughter yoga? Okay. That's a practice that's actually quite popular, and it's picked up in South Africa, and you can even do it online if you're looking for it. And they hold a session online or in person where they force you to laugh, and they give you a whole origin story of the physical benefits of laughter. And in some cases, you have to sit in front of an audience and you just have to laugh for no reason. There doesn't have to be humor to initiate laughter. It's all about how laughter itself is physiologically beneficial. So it relieves stress. One of the things they mentioned is deep breathing, how it clears out your lungs, because the more you laugh, the more, let's call it old air you're letting out of your lungs, and the more you inhale to give a really good belly laugh, the more clean air you're bringing into your lungs. So they really focus on those two things. And I would also say now I'm thinking of gallows humor and just perspective. I think it was Freud that said a sense of humor is the highest psychical achievement because it helps you deal with difficult or challenging situations. So I think having a good sense of humor, the physiological benefits is cognitively, it allows you to see things from a different perspective and maybe see, the silver lining or positive things in a very negative or challenging situation. Thank you.
Thank you. There is one more quick question from Prof here, and then we can wrap.
Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the exception. Thank you very much for the very insightful talk. I'm already thinking about how I can use it in my own scholarship, to be honest.
Or how we can collaborate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the only question I had is, unless I might have missed this, in which case I apologize, because I quickly burst out and then came back in. Does the theory also leave some room for ambiguity and in particular simultaneous functions of humor? Sometimes, for instance, when it comes to social norms, I will be talking about this later, the same humor in the same context might have at least two functions. It could be rebellious in one respect, but quite norm reinforcing in another respect. I'm thinking, for instance, about the example of the gentleman who sort of started with self-deprecating humor, in which he brought in sort of norms about masculinity and body and things like that. So in that case, am I right that in conclusion, the humor was uplifting, right? Because the audience somehow helped him to sort of...
Yes, it was lifting, yes.
Yeah, okay. So when it comes to that specific target, in this case being the person, yes, it's uplifting. But when it comes to those norms, because those norms, he specifically taps into what we could call hegemonic masculinist notions of masculinity, right? So in those cases, because he knows that those are, in mainstream, those are accepted as sort of regular norms. Nobody is going to sort of negate them. So in that case, when the audience sort of buys into that norm and basically says yes to that sort of invitation to laughter, and yes, they bring up that the person's sort of it's uplifting, but with regard to those norms, they also stabilize the norms. They tend to stabilize them, right?
Yes, I do agree with you.
Yeah. So yeah, that was what I think. I would love to again use the theory, and I'll tell you later which part of my own talk and my, in a sense, theory it could actually help to enhance
that would be great.
Those ambiguous areas, especially. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So you mentioning to norms, to the status quo.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So it's up to everyone or everyone involved engaged in the humorous scenario. So it would be the comedians, the audiences, to determine everyone has a different perception of what is normal and efficient and vulnerable, but there are generally widely recognized conceptions of, for example, what a sexy male physique would be and what it is not. But the function of this theory is not necessarily, it's more focused on the motivation for the laughter. So the audience's laughter, although that is a standard norm, is the audience's laughter to lift Mulhaney and Haydar up, or is it to lower his status? And in this context, we analyze it and
I see. No, I understand. I'm sorry for interrupting, but because it ends with call to action, and we're supposed to use this in particular for social justice purposes, and certain norms are specifically related to sort of the arena in which social justice. That's why I asked. Again, thank you very much. So you'll see why this is a concern of mine when I talk later, because it's exactly, what I'm talking about.
So very quickly, what would your suggestion be from your perspective right now? How would you say we would bring this into the theory, or are we going to discuss this after?
No, I'm not sure. You'll see, because that's where, as a matter of fact, I leave it. I'll talk about 4 zones which I have come up with, and one of the zones I have called mixed, fluid, or ambiguous zone.
Okay.
This would fall into that.
Yes.
And to be honest, when it comes to practical advice, it's probably the hardest in terms of, to deal with, right?
Because humour
'cause-
is also always ambiguous. There's
yeah.
always grey areas.
It could,
How do you
absolutely, yeah.
land
yeah.
on one or the other?
Yeah, okay.
Thanks,
But thank you very much for actually, providing some sort of a grammar with which we could understand, humor from a totally different perspective. It reminded me of benign violation theory, but it has, quite a lot of distinct qualities to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.